Okay, we're going to start out working with the Damascus, and I'm going to read the whole chapter, which is only 14 verses, and then we'll talk about the verses themselves. An oracle concerning Damascus. See, Damascus will no longer be a city, but will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aror will be deserted and left to flocks which will lie down, with no one to make them afraid. The fortified city will disappear from Ephraim. And remember, Ephraim is Israel, the northern kingdom. And royal power from Damascus, the remnant of Ephraim, will be like the glory of the Israelites, declares the Lord Almighty. In that day, the glory of Jacob will fade. The fat of his body will waste away. It will be when a reaper gathers the standing grain and harvests the grain with his arm. When a man gleans heads of grain in the valley of Ephraim, yet some gleanings will remain, as when an olive tree is beaten, leaving 2 or 3 olives on the topmost branches, 4 or 5 on the fruitful boughs, declares the Lord, the God of Israel. In that day, men will look to their Maker and turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel. They will not look to the altars, the works of their hands, and they will have no regard for the Asher poles. And the incense altars their fingers have made. In that day, their strong cities, which they left because of the Israelites, will be like places abandoned to thickets and undergrowth, and all will be desolation. You have forgotten God your Savior. You have not remembered the rock, your fortress. Therefore, though you set out the finest plants and plant imported vines, though on the day you set them out, you make them grow, and on the morning when you plant them, you bring them to bud, yet the harvest will be as nothing in the day of disease and incurable pain. Oh, the raging of many nations, they rage like the raging sea. Oh, the uproar of the peoples, they roar like the roaring of great waters. Although the peoples roar like the roar of surging waters, when he rebukes them, they flee far away, driven before the wind like chaff on the hills, like tumbleweed before a gale. In the evening, sudden terror. Before the morning, they are gone. This is the portion of those who loot us, the lot of those who plunder us. The heading for this chapter tells us the oracle is directed to Damascus, and yet there is much in it that relates to Israel rather than Syria's capital, Damascus. We know from chapters 7 through 8 that there was an alliance between Syria and Ephraim, and a threat to Syria and a threat to Judah. Since they shared political and military goals, it is understandable that they would share in one of Isaiah's oracles. Ephraim's devotion to the pagan shrines at Bethel and Dan made her a rebel against the Lord. But now she is unequally yoked with a pagan nation in an endeavor to coerce Judah into an unholy league against Assyria. Verses 1 through 3, this oracle opens with a call to visualize what God would make of a one proud city. The downfall of Damascus would not be an isolated event, for other cities would be deserted also. Israel had chosen to accept a close link with Damascus, so she had to accept the consequences of that relationship. A shared purpose involves a shared judgment. The basis of the league between the two nations was chiefly military, and it was in military terms that she would suffer in the loss of her fortified city. This city was the fortress that Ephraim hoped would protect her from the Assyrians. In verses 4 through 6, The repeated phrase "in that day" underlines the decisiveness of the Lord's judgment of Ephraim. In giving such judgments, God is making an emphatic point about sin and his attitude toward it. The judgment on Ephraim was to be devastating, leaving the people decimated, a remnant so weak and small as apparently to be of no account. The glory of Jacob suggests Ephraim's honor, the respect in which others would hold him. He would become subject to a wasting disease, making him a sorry sight, as if he had been subject to a terrible beating. Again, the consequences are told through the harvest. Isaiah uses the grain harvest. The reaper's arm encircles and makes taut many stalks of grain, so he can remove the heads by the sweep of the sickle. Fruit trees will be climbed and fruit beaten off the trees. In each case, the farmer tries to get as much as possible, so only a small amount is left for the gleaners. Remember, it's like a tradition where after they've gone through the field and harvested, they always try to leave a little bit for a lot of times it's women that come in and pick up what's left. And they do it with everything, not just grains, but with the trees, the fruit trees, and all of that. And these normally are poor women. They come in to feed their families they could be widows, and that's how they get food. And they use the grains, of course, for flour to make bread. So thorough would judgment be, and yet destruction would not be total. The section starts with the glory of Jacob and ends with the God of Israel, as a reminder that God of the patriarchal promises has an ongoing purpose beyond temporal judgment. In verses 7 through 8, the judgment of Ephraim would bring a spirit of penitence to at least some of the survivors. We all are the children of him whose hand took the forbidden fruit, and our own hands are defiled. Remember, we're all children from Adam and Eve, and we'll carry that through generation after generation. And such hand cannot construct a way to God. So what they're talking about here is that the Israelites turned to paganism, and they built altars to them. And they're mainly in Bethel and Dan, I think, are the two places. And they built those altars with their hands. So that's what he's talking about. They already had hands of sinners, right? Now they're using them even more so to build pagan altars. And so they're defiled. And they cannot, as I've said, construct a way to God. The altars mentioned here might be the Yahweh shrines with the bull images at Bethel and Dan. Remember, when we studied in Kings, they talked about how they turned to paganism and how they actually even went into the temple at Jerusalem and put a pagan altar in the temple in front of the altar of God. And so, I mean, they've been doing this for quite a while. This isn't just something new. And so God is not a happy camper, so to say. The return here to the Holy One of Israel means they no longer worship the pagan idols they made with their own hands. There was a section I wanted to read. I think no, it's not this section. In verses 9 through 11, the theme of judgment returns when the Israelites came into the promised land of Canaan. Strong cities were abandoned to them. God came in with the soldiers, and he helped them basically kill everybody that was there. That was what they promised to do, that whatever city they went in to take over, there would be no one left that was there before. That was part of the promise that they made, but we know that they broke that once or twice. And but that was part of the whole deal. He was going to go with them and help them, but there could be no one left alive from whoever was there because they were pagans. And he knew what would happen if they were left alive to live side by side with them. The Lord worked for them. Now, however, the situation has been changed, and the same cities will be left abandoned by the Israelites as they are under the judging hand of God. Now, I'm going to read 12 through 14 again. I want you to close your eyes, okay? And see if you can visualize or feel what is going on in these 3 verses. Oh, the raging of many nations. They rage like the raging sea. Oh, the uproar of the peoples. They roar like the roaring of great waters. Although the people roar like the roar of surging waters, when he rebukes them, they flee far away. Driven before the wind like chaff on the hills, like tumbleweed before a gale. In the evening, sudden terror. Before the morning, they are gone. This is the portion of those who loot us, the lot of those who plunder us. Can you picture that? When I was reading it, have you ever been to the ocean and a storm's coming in and see the waves come in and how they crash down on the beach? One of the most, I think, impressive things I ever saw in California was they have cliffs and the beach is down below. But if you're standing on the cliff and all the rocks that are out there, and you see these waves come in and they just wash over those rocks, and I was, coming from the East Coast where our beaches, our coastline is so smooth, and then to go out there where it's rocky and cliffs and everything, it was to me it was beautiful. But I had been out there as a storm was supposed to be coming in, and it was getting cloudy and everything, and the waves were just crashing against, and it was just, to me, it was exciting, and just to be able to stand there and watch and see that water just come up. And the waves coming in were not like little baby waves. They were huge coming in over those rocks. And the rocks would be probably some of them half as big as the walls here. That high up, out of the water. And it was really impressive. And this made me think of that, how the raging water, So, well, I already told you my story, so I don't have to read that. It speaks about water spraying everywhere. It speaks of people being driven like the wind, blowing the chaff on the hills. My condo has a woods behind it. And we're only about 10 feet. There's a 10 feet difference from my wall and my condo to the woods, okay? And when the wind is really blowing, like when we get those wind gusts of like 40 or 50 miles an hour, it's like a wind tunnel. And what you get is this howling that goes on. I mean, and it'll wake, if I go to sleep and then it starts this, it wakes me up. And I mean, it is just so loud. And so here again, you know, I'm thinking about this when I'm reading this about the wind, how it, you know, it drives the water up, but it also is driving the people, right? And so that brought that up to me, and and I have here in my notes, it roars, but it's more like a howling, you know. And so I can hear and picture what the prophet is telling us. And can you imagine it? And that's why I ask you to close your eyes and just listen. In verse 14, if this oracle is a new thought enters, not only will God's judgment of the enemies of his people be decisive, it's going to be swift. Because how do you know that? What tells you in what I've read here? What tells you it's going to be swift?
It says before the morning they are.
Yeah, right. Yes. The view of dusk is presented in terms of the overpowering emotion of terror and the prophet leading up to the imagination of the hearers to the scene of the pagan soldiers eager for their prey. Yes. Isaiah is an incredible writer. Now, we know that God's giving him what to say, right? But he's giving them, my impression, okay, the way I look at it is, he gives him the ideas of what he wants him to get across. He doesn't give him all the words. And he puts it in this literary form. Basically, it's almost like poetry. And he, in this section here, has been very, very good. When you read it, it's easy for you to visualize what he's saying, how he's putting it, especially with the verses 12 through 14. And I just wanted to make sure that I already said that Damascus, okay, is the capital of Ephraim, which is Syria, okay? And it's located northeast of Mount Hermon on a strategic trade route between the Mediterranean, Egypt, and Arabia. So just like, you know, it's an area that's going to get a lot of traffic. Ephraim, of course, is the northern kingdom, and it's mentioned here in the beginning of 17 that there is an alliance between the northern kingdom and Damascus against Assyria. And in 12 and 14, I have a little note here that says, the same sequence of powerful invader that is quickly cut down occurs in 10:28-34. Both passages may refer to Sennacherib's invasion of 701 BC. But it is more likely that the prophet here speaks more generally of Israel's experience of the world of nations as a perpetual threat to her existence. Okay, we're going to look at 18, and I'm going to read that whole section through too.
Did you do the Damascus question?
No, we'll do all the questions at the end if that's okay. This is the prophecy of Cush. Woe to the land of whirring wings along the rivers of Cush, which sends envoys by sea and papyrus boats over the water. Go, swift messages, to a people tall and smooth-skinned, to a people feared far and wide, an aggressive nation of strange speech, whose land is divided by rivers. All you people of the world, you who live on the earth, when a banner is raised on the mountains, you will see it. And when a trumpet sounds, you will hear it. This is what the Lord says to me. I will remain quiet and will look on from my dwelling place, like shimmering heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, when the blossom is gone and the flower becomes a ripening grape, he will cut off the shoots with pruning knives and cut down and take away the spreading branches. They will all be left to the mountain birds of prey and to the wild animals. The birds will feed on them all summer, the wild animals all winter. At that time, gifts will be brought to the Lord Almighty from a people tall and smooth-skinned, from a people feared far and wide, an aggressive nation of strange speech, whose land is divided by rivers. The gifts will be brought to Mount Zion, the place of the Lord of the place of the name of the Lord Almighty. 18, all the people of the world. To clarify that, that's in verse 30. All the nations arrayed against God's people. That's what that includes. All the people, all the nations that are against Israel. And in 7, he talks about the gifts. According to 2 Chronicles 32:23, gifts were brought to Hezekiah after Sennacherib's death. The Moabites were asked to send tribute to Mount Zion in 16:1. We read that not too long ago. So the gifts that the Moabites were supposed to bring were what? Sheep, right, like 1,000 sheep. Okay. The oracle 18 on Cush is unique in Isaiah 13 through 23 because it and chapter 20 are the only two oracles that did not start with the word oracle. If you look back, if you look at 19, it says an oracle concerning. And all of them except for 18 and 20 start that way. It starts out with the word, and this is Hebrew, hoy, it's H-O-Y, which translated here means woe. The word usually gives a warning of doom. This word usually gives, no, I already said that. Biblical Cush is usually translated Ethiopia. But this translation is using Cush because it designates a much larger area than what present-day Ethiopia would be. And that's why they use Cush in this translation versus Ethiopia.
And what I found was Sudan and Ethiopia. That would be good.
Yeah.
I don't know on a map to see how big all that is.
I think that would refer to Ethiopia, is referred to by the tall and smooth people.
Yeah. The visit of the ambassadors could be placed either during the Philistine revolt against Assyria in 712 BC or in the period of restlessness after the death of Sargon in 705. If we look at verses 1 through 3, the land of whirring wings. As a visitor to the Nile Valley, you would be aware of the meaning of this. because apparently it has swarms of insects. And so you hear them all the time, and that's what it means about the land of the whirring wings. Ambassadors in Old Testament were not permanent officials placed by nations in the capital cities of other states with whom they were on friendly terms, but they were emissaries sent out on special commissions. Isaiah gave charge to the emissaries to return with speed to the land they came from. Their mission, though political expedient, was spiritually inappropriate and irrelevant. In effect, Isaiah is saying, Jehovah will crush the Assyrians in his own time without human help. And that signal judgment will be a demonstration to Ethiopia and all the world of his supreme Godhead. The military reputation of Cush was well known, and since their conquest of mighty Egypt, the message given to the messengers had universal application, for the whole world would reverberate at the trumpet blast heralding mighty Israel. I just lost it. Assyria's fall. The banner and the trumpet represent the call to rally for battle, and that's what they mean.
You know what I thought when I read that? When a banner is raised, you'll see it, and the trumpet sounds, you will hear it. I thought of the end times. Jesus said, you will know.
Yeah.
Everyone will know.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting what conversations you get into with people that you don't really know, but you see a lot, like the gentleman who works at BJ's. Okay, he knows that I like to read murder mysteries, and so we always, if I'm buying a book, he wants to know who I'm reading, you know, and that kind of thing. And we ended up talking about the situation, you know, what's happening in our world today with the virus and all of this. And he's a Christian, I know that, and he was saying about the end times are here. And I looked at him and I said, well, maybe, but we don't know, you know. And he directed me to read 2 Timothy chapter 3, which I have not done yet because I just haven't thought about it. And then when I see my little note with that written on, I think, got to do this. But I had a lady that I visited that, she died now, I guess, 2.5 years ago. And she seriously thought we were in the end times back then. If she was alive today, she would definitely think that, I think.
How you define it.
Well, and that's true. I mean, but, you know, it's just like I told him. I mean, we can stand here and say, oh, yeah, all this is happening, but we don't know that it is. I mean, there's so many people out there who try to predict it. And you know, and Jesus even said, only the Father knows. So when he wants us to know, I guess he'll blow his trumpet and put his banner up. But anyway.
Let's face it, we don't know. We don't know when it's, and this could last for years before.
Well, it's been going on for thousands of years, hasn't it? I mean.
But it could be, I'm not so sure it's not the beginning of the tribulation. Of what's happening in this world, especially what's happening.
Well, if you read Revelation, I mean, and there are other places that you can read, you can see, yeah, okay, yeah, this is happening now. But is it just the beginning? Are we to the end? We don't know. You know, we just have to hope and pray that we're on the right side.
According to the Bible, I think it's going to be a lot worse than it is now before the end comes. I don't
what was that series of books? I read them and I can't think of the series.
I know what you
Yeah, did you read them?
Yes.
I did too. I actually borrowed the books from Jean. Jean had them, and I borrowed them from her and read it. I was just curious to see.
left behind.
Yeah, yeah. That actually was very interesting.
I had it on tape, so when
Oh.
I was on the road, I could listen to it, every one, and I think it was like 13 books before.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of books. Yeah, because she finally, after giving me the first few, and I was reading them so fast, she just gave me all of them and said, "Here," you know. Yeah, because I mean, depending on how busy my day is or whatever, I can read a book a day. I'm a very fast reader, for one thing. I have another book for you too. Actually, I have another 2 books, I think now. I keep finding duplicates. You know.
The reason why we watch TV,
But I don't read nearly that fast.
I don't either.
and she knows the theme of the program better than I do, and I'm watching it.
Well, see, I have a distant side, I have a close-up.
Oh, okay. Actually, so do I. If you've had cataract surgery, you do. That got me into trouble with the Department of Motor Vehicles the other day. Yeah, they made me go. I just had a checkup, an eye checkup, because I have one annually because of my diabetes. and yeah, he said, well, you're going to, I told him, I said, look, if I needed glasses, my doctor would have told me. I just had a checkup 2 weeks ago. He said, well, then you're going to have to get this form filled. And so I did. I had to take it. Now, this is right before, this is the 23rd of December. And you're going into a doctor's office, and you're asking for this to be done like now. Well, she had a full slate of patients. She said she would sit down and do it like after all her patients were seen. And she had 2 more to do, but she would do all 3 of them at the same time. And I could pick it up Tuesday because the office was closed Friday and Monday. Well, Tuesday was my birthday, which is when I had to have my license done by. So I said, well, if that's the best that can happen, that's fine. I'll see you Tuesday. Well, I got a call. I went and did my 2 visits I had to do. And on the way home, I'm driving 95, my phone's ringing. Well, I can't answer it. So by the time I get home, there's a message there. I can come up. She actually took the time during her lunch to do my paperwork. So I could come up, and because the woman explained to her why I needed it. And she took pity on me. And so, but, and because of that, I now have a restriction on my license that says I have to have side mirrors on my car. Now, have you seen a car with no side mirrors?
Isn't that a requirement for the car?
I would think so.
I don't know. When I told my daughter that, she says, "Mom, that's the craziest restriction I've ever heard of in my life. All cars have side mirrors."
It actually is written here.
Yes, it's there. Yep.
That's the DMV for you.
I said, okay, but no worries. Anyway, verses 4 through 6. Isaiah often urged his contemporaries to adopt an attitude of quiet faith in God instead of trusting alliances with other powers. Here it is, God himself, who is quiet, contemplating calmly the frenzied scene of diplomatic and military activity. Isaiah, through his request for quiet faith, was really calling his hearers to view things from a divine viewpoint. In verse 5 shows us God's act of judgment. The divine harvester, here again, is dealing with not the fruit-laden branches, but those that are barren and empty. In such circumstances, the branches are valueless to a man and left for the birds and animals. This suggests that the fierce Assyrians would themselves become the prey of others. Also, Ethiopia, a barren shoot, would fall under the judgment of God. In verse 7, which is the very end, the very people who from a position of strength had sent word to Judah to secure her cooperation in military venture would come again with gifts for the true God in Zion. So, interesting, between the two readings, the two verses, the one for Damascus and then the one for Cush, even though 17 deals about half of it with Ephraim, which is Israel, what he's going to do with them, along with Damascus. But then Cush, to me, he's not backing down, but it didn't seem as
Harsh?
yeah. Am I wrong? I mean, that was the impression I got when I was studying it. I mean, yeah, it's going to be desolate. I mean, nothing's going to grow. Everything's going to be gone. But the people are going to come with gifts. But they're coming for gifts for God. Cush is. So, I want to see.
Did you see any rationale for why those two chapters don't start with an oracle?
No, I didn't. In fact, when I was doing it, it just says they're unique. It doesn't say why. He didn't say that. There was no explanation in my commentary about why it wasn't. It's not there. Because I think if you just even look ahead towards all the oracles, they all have an oracle. Of course, 20, when we get to 20, because you know what they're talking about? Egypt and Cush. See, again, there's no oracle there.
Is it already talked about in the beginning thing?
Yeah. And now but back when we get to 21, there it says an oracle concerning, and it keeps going through the oracles. Of course, we'll end, I think is it 24?
Bible doesn't have it saying in the oracle.
Yeah, hers doesn't and mine does. Here we go again.
Hers says oracle?
Mine says
Mine
oracle
doesn't.
on that.
Does yours?
On 18 and 20 now.
Right.
But it doesn't say it on any of mine.
Well, see, that's your translation.
It's the same.
Same.
But it's the same Bible, but different people translate.
Different years.
Well, in different years, different people are translating. And so they're not. But they make such a big deal out of with the oracle in saying that. What?
I was wondering, with the gifts that would be brought to the Lord,
They say prophecy.
was that any reference to like the 3 kings? I don't know.
No, it's relating back to the Moabites. They're relating it back to them. They say it could be, well, if we look at 2 Chronicles 32:23, there were gifts brought to Hezekiah. And remember, we studied that in Kings, where Hezekiah got gifts because they wanted them to go to battle with them against, I forget who, but, and so they were bringing them gifts to kind of bribe them. And then the Moabites did the same thing with, they brought the sheep because they wanted them to side with them against Assyria. And I don't think we can relate it back to the 3 kings. That's an interesting suggestion, though.
But I think of the Christmas carol, We Three Kings of Orient. But then I guess that's a Christmas carol.
Versus Africa. Okay.
So, okay, let's look at the questions. There's not many of them. There's only 3 questions this week. Okay, question Damascus. And it says this oracle dates from between 740 and 732 BC, when Damascus and Israel were allies and not yet destroyed. That is why the Lord interweaves words against Israel with words against Damascus. 15, question 15. Most Israelites will die as rebels and worshipers of what their fingers have made. But a few gleanings will survive this harvest of judgment. What will those who abandon their own creations trust instead? And you'll see the answer, or some verses 7 and 8 in 17.
And will look to their Maker and turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel, not look to the altars, the poles, and the incense altars.
Yeah, they'll come back to God.
But it looks like they don't there. The remnant is a small group.
Well, and we also read that it's going to be a small, weak group.
Yeah.
Yeah. Question 16. When God's people try to produce good things while ignoring the Lord, what happens?
The harvest will fail, disease and pain will occur.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Cush. Here, just like Debbie said, this region is now called Sudan and Ethiopia, an area thick with whirring insects. The Cushites sent envoys to Hezekiah, urging him to ally for defense. Isaiah tells in this prophecy how the Lord deals with threats to his people when they trust in him. So question 17, what does 18, 3 through 7 tell you about God's methods, character, and abilities?
I believe he plans our future for us and trust God for our needs, or be destroyed.
Actually, his work will be visible to all and can't be ignored.
Right? Okay. I have, he is patient, willing to wait for the right time. He is a man of his word and can do anything he wishes.
So in other words, he loves us, but we must obey.
Yeah, the one thing that is the thread throughout everything you're going to read in the Old Testament especially is what?
Wait.
Is obedience.
Obedience.
I mean, the whole reason why he's doing that, he's given Isaiah all these oracles is what? He's passing judgment because of their disobedience. All of them. And he's going after their enemies. He's going after all the enemies, but just like we read in 17, he also is addressing Israel, Ephraim, because of what they've done. So no one escapes. Sometimes I think, in today's world, how do we put what we've read here? How do we put that in our lives today? What can we take out of it to put in our lives today?
Wait for the Lord's answer through prayer
That we
and
may
Bible.
be judged as communist Chinese who don't believe in God. If you're a non-believer,
Mm-hmm.
you can be, how do I say this? You're being judged as some of the nations in the world are definitely gonna be judged if you don't do the right things.
Yeah, I mean, when the end comes, aren't we all going to be judged? It doesn't matter where we live. It's not like just the Christians are going to be judged. It's everybody. Everybody in the world. You're going to line up and you're either going to be sheep or you're going to be a goat. And we want to be sheep.
So I have trust in God or be destroyed.
Yeah.
And we know that all these things did happen,
Yes.
so we should believe that all the other things in here will happen.
That's right. Yep. Yeah.
I think if you convince everyone to believe that what kind of a world is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
never happened.
That's why with the Left Behind series, I found it interesting how they handled the end. You know, and you sit and wonder, well, how far away are we from, how far-fetched is that?
Again, I didn't read it, so I don't know.
It's, well, people were judged. And they were, evil went, and the good guy was, and it's interesting. I mean, we know. We know. Revelation tells us you're going to be judged. You're going to be a sheep or a goat, and the sheep are going to be with the Lord. The others are going to a fiery furnace. So we have to wait. I have this book here. I just like to read it because it gives some more information that we can chew on. Isaiah 17 begins a prophecy about Damascus and how it is gone, relating to Damascus as if its destruction has already occurred, but we know it hasn't, not yet. The prophetic section also talks about the gleanings that remain from the harvest. As devastating as the destruction will be for Damascus, a little good will remain. The harvest, that's what they're talking about. The harvest gleanings to me is, I'm wondering if it's not relating to the remnant. Because the gleanings they're talking about Ephraim. And I think that's the remnant. The prophet also warns how people will turn to God for help, but it will be too late for them. Destruction will still come. We serve a God of mercy and grace, but if we spurn God over and over, eventually he will not hear us when we cry to him for help. The people of Damascus has come to the end of God's patience, and only divine judgment awaited them. And Cush and God's timing. The prophet Isaiah next turns to prophecy about Cush, a nation that covered modern-day southern Egypt, Sudan, and northern Ethiopia. They too would look to Judah to form an alliance against Assyria, but Isaiah let them know that God would take care of Assyria in his time. The Assyrian army first had to complete the task God gave them, to punish the people of Israel by taking them captive. Everything has to happen in a pattern. He has a set, agenda, and everything has to happen in that time sequence. However, once God's purposes had been accomplished, he would intervene and cut them off, just when they, like grapes, were beginning to ripen, to extend their empire. They would be killed and would be left on the mountains as food for the wild birds in the summer and wild animals in the winter. At the Assyrian defeat, Isaiah predicted that the Cushites would bring gifts of thanksgiving and praise to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord Yahweh. So, they ask a question here. What can you do to publicly express your gratitude to the Lord for what he has done in your life lately or in the life of someone you know. It says, make a plan and carry it out. This week or next. So, you know, if someone has done something really nice for you, what do? Make scones.
Okay. I was going through this to see the order, and I noticed on the week of, when we come in February 9th, it says Isaiah 20, it says Isaiah 13, one day, but it should be Isaiah 23.
Yes. I think I changed it on mine.
Where is that? Week
February 9th.
9th, February 9th, 23 instead of 13.
You know, it's really funny. I went back and looked at from a prior Bible study. You know, at the end of the Bible study, we would always say, you know, who we needed prayers for. You know, family, friends, neighbors, and I mean, I always thought that I thanked God every morning for all these different things, and every evening for all these different things. And then when I looked at all the prayers, I saw, you know, all the answers that we had gotten that I kind of just forgot about.
Mhm.
Because, you know, I maybe didn't know the people or whatever, and it's like, and had to say, you know, Lord, I'm so sorry, because I should have been thanking you for
Right.
all these little prayers that were sent up. So just, you know, things like that.
Well, and that's true. I mean, I hear almost daily, I get names of people that, you know, that I'm supposed to pray for. And I do. When I walk in the morning, I pray almost the whole walk. That's what I was saying. If I keep getting all these names, I might have to extend my walk more. Yeah.
I'm telling you to exercise.
Nah, I guess. But it's, you know, and I don't know all these people. But I say, but you know, that's another thing. If you tell somebody you're going to pray for them, then you better pray for them. Because God doesn't like that.